Today we're going to take a look at section 13.2. This section is called consumer credit. We're going to talk about two different types of consumer credit, like categories. But first, let me actually describe what consumer credit is. So consumer credit refers to borrowing money to finance purchases of cars, furniture, appliances, jewelry, electronics, etc. Technically, real estate mortgages are also consumer credit, but they usually involve much larger amounts and longer repayment periods. So they have some special things associated with them, so we'll talk more about those kinds of the mortgages later. So really, consumer credit is any time you borrow money for anything. That's what we're looking at. And there are two different types, or I called them categories earlier, of loans or ways of borrowing. The first one that we're going to look at is called an installment loan. So installment loans involve borrowing a set of amount upfront and then paying a series of equal installments or payments until the loan is paid off. A mortgage, although we're not talking about it specifically right now, is an installment loan. Your car loans, your student loans, those are all installment loans. There's another one that we're going to look at specifically today that's an appliance loan. Some of you may have seen or even maybe you have cell phone payment plan loans. Of the two that we're going to discuss today, installment loans are the easier one to work with. Because they don't change monthly. Everything is consistent. Once you figure out the amount, it's a consistent bill, even like in your budget. Yeah.
So is all the payments being equal, is that like the crucial part of an installment loan?
That's part of it. It's all being equal. And it's also being that you pay it off at a specific point in time. Like you have a fixed start and a fixed end, and then you're done with it. Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are important in this definition. One of them is that it's equal payments, and the other one is that it actually gets paid off. The opposite of this, the other option that we're going to look at today, is more like a credit card, where it's a revolving amount, and so it is variable, and there isn't an end to it, or at least a definitive end. It's a flexible kind of an ending point. So taking a look at installment loans, we're going to do an example. Ann and Andy, their refrigerator dies. Completely unexpected. That's the way it happens with appliances. You never know it's happening. Not always, but I mean, generally, we actually had ours die last winter in the middle of a freeze, which was perfect timing in some sense because our garage just doubled as the freezer for a period of time, refrigerator freezer. Put everything in the garage along the side of it. It was fabulous. It was my fabulous refrigerator. It's huge, very inconvenient, by the way. And the only problem was that at the time, we're in the middle of pandemic stuff, and so it was really hard to find a replacement, actually. We certainly didn't get the replacement that we would have chosen had we had a choice. We simply got what was available within a couple of different options. And then it was hard to get it to our house, and so we ended up without a refrigerator for about a week. So Ann and Andy are in the middle of paying off some debt, and so they don't just have a pile of cash sitting somewhere to buy a new refrigerator. So against their better judgment, they decide to finance a new refrigerator. We'll talk about the against their better judgment and what that's talking about in just a little bit. The store offers 6-month interest-free financing. Have you heard of that before? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the fine print beyond that you may or may not be aware of. The important piece of this is as long as Ann and Andy pay the fridge off in those 6 months. That's the important piece. That's when it's interest-free. The store requires a $200 down payment on the $2,000 refrigerator. So a lot of the calculations that we do within, especially this particular problem, are not difficult calculations, but you have to know what it's asking for, and it might not be terminology that's super familiar to you, portions of it. So we're going to make sure that we understand the question and the terminology that's being used. Okay, so the starter is that there's this down payment. So they go to the store, the sticker price plus tax, that's what we're doing, is the $2,000. Okay, just for nice whole number's sake. That's why we're using 2,000. And the store requires that they pay $200 on the front end. So our first question wants us to know, how much are they going to finance? So any idea how we find that? It would be $1,800. So how did you do that? Yeah. So the financed amount, and I'm going to write it down just to make sure that when you look back at it later, you remember where we got the pieces from. The financed amount is the total price minus the down payment. Another way of saying it is that it's the amount that you still have remaining to pay for the product. So that for us is the 2,000 minus the 200, and that gives us the 1,800 that Jacob told us about. Does that make sense? So we're going to see questions about down payments throughout the rest of chapter 13. It's always going to work the same way. You pay the down payment, you finance the rest is the idea. So the next one talks about how much does the couple need to pay each month to avoid finance charges. So they've got $1,800 that they owe. And how long do they have to pay it to avoid the finance charges? 6 months. Yeah, so any idea what we might do, Trey? You bet. So we're going to divide our 1,800, our total amount, by the 6 months that we have. And it'll be $300 a month. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's what the appliance store is counting on. Life happens, and you don't quite pay off, or maybe you don't pay off any of the $1,800. Right? Because if everybody did it, then why would they give you just 6 months free money? They wouldn't do that if everybody paid it off. They're counting on the majority of the people not to be able to pay this off in that time frame. So we're going to suppose Ann and Andy don't pay off the fridge in 6 months. So if they don't, what happens is whatever remains of the amount they owe, they have to pay the interest on it. But they have to pay the interest on it back to the starting point of the loan. So that entire 6 months that was interest-free is no longer interest-free. They have to pay the interest on the amount that they still owe at the end of that 6 months. That's the catch. That's the fine print. Okay? Make sense? So we're going to assume, and they're going to pay it off. Also, the premise that we're using here on this is that they're going to pay it off for the next 2 years. That's the way the policy is set up in the appliance company. Okay, so if Ann and Andy fail to make any payments toward the loan, in the way that it's described in Part C, they're going to backdate the interest for the whole $1,800 to the beginning of the loan. Does that make sense? Okay, add-on interest, where it's described right here, is the same thing as simple interest. Do you remember our formula for simple interest? It started I equal.
PR.
P-R-T. Right. So simple interest, add-on interest, same idea. The principal, the amount that they borrowed but didn't pay back, right? So if they paid part of it back, that's what we would be using for P. But we're assuming they didn't pay any of it back, so that would be our $1,800. What's the interest rate? So, what was it?
12.
Yep, it's up here. It's 12% add-on interest rate. So what would 12% be as a decimal? Because that's what goes into this formulas. What was it?
0.12.
Yep, 0.12. So with interest rate formulas, right, these formulas, we're always doing time in years. What's the years that they're having to pay this interest for? That's what they're paying for into the future. I want to know what happened from the start until now. Half of a year. Okay, so right now we're taking care of what happened in the past. Okay, so 6 months ends, and immediately they owe extra money than they owed before. Does that make sense? And we're trying to find out how much that extra is right now. So we're backdating this for half of a year, the 6 months that they had the free money, quote unquote, for. So if you don't have it out already, go ahead and grab a calculator. You're going to want it for the rest of our pieces that we're going to do. we would like to take 1,800 times 0.12 times 0.5. What is it? 108. Okay, so this is the finance charge for the backdated 6 months. Does that make sense? Okay, so starting at 6 months and 1 day, they don't owe $1,800 anymore. What do they now owe? Right, so what we owe right now is $1,908. And if we paid it off right now, we'd owe $1,908 and we would be done. But that's not what we're doing. How are we paying it off? For the next 2 years. So this $1,908 is our new principal. It's the new amount we owe, and we're going to be charged the new interest for the next 2 years based on that number. So, yes?
Can you just multiply by 4 then instead of going through the whole problem again? If that was for 6 months?
So actually no, because we actually have to pay interest on the 108 as well. Yeah. So yeah, we can't just find like the 108 and then multiply it by 4 and add on some more of it, because we're now going to pay interest on the 108 as well. That's a good question. We do have a formula that we can use though. There was another simple interest formula that calculated how much we have at the end of an amount of time that we owe. And it looked like this. This is one of the versions of it. Do you guys remember that one? The amount that we owe of simple interest at the end of however many years, in this case it'll be 2 years. So as we're working with this, we're going to figure out how much we're going to end up paying for this refrigerator if we pay it off of the 2 years as it's described. So the 1908 is actually how much we owe at the moment that the loan goes into, not exactly default, but goes into overdrive of the 6 months, right? And then we're going to have now the 1908 that gets multiplied by the 0.12. And our time, this time is going to be like you guys mentioned, the 2 years. So go ahead and take, and this is one of the two formulas. If you want to use the one that looks like this, you can. Whoops. That was another formula that we had. If you wanted to use that one, you could use that one. They'll work both the same. All right, so if you take 1908 and you add it to 1908 times 0.12 times 2, what do you end up getting?
2,365.92.
Do I have a second on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so $2,365.92. Okay, is everybody good? So that's the total amount that we're now going to pay for the refrigerator. We should have paid $1,800 when we had it, right? Like that was the goal. It didn't work out. Now we're going to pay $2,300 and some change. This is an installment loan, though. So they're going to take that amount and they're going to equally divide it across the entire loan. How many times am I going to make this payment? 24. And where'd 24 come from, Hallie?
2 years, 12 plus 12.
Yeah, 2 years, 12 months plus 12 months, or 12 times 2 for the 2 years, right? So it's 24 months. So we're going to take our 2365.92, and we're going to divide it by the number of times we're going to make an installment payment. It's typically done monthly. It doesn't have to be, but this one it is special. So go ahead and divide that. $98.58. And while I don't think this one actually does it, if there is a situation where there's decimals extending beyond 2, we're going to round to the nearest decimal, all that kind of stuff, right? Do normal rounding rules, 2 decimal places to make it money. Okay, everybody good? So now they're going to pay $98.58 a month for the next 2 years. So what I'd like for us to look at as our last part of this particular problem is, what did they really in total pay for the refrigerator? So they're going to pay this $2365.92. Sorry, I'll box my answer in there. But they paid something else as well.
The $200 down payment.
You bet. The $200 down payment from over here, right? Where was it? There it was. That $200 down payment is also part of what they've paid. So this piece right here is also included in the payment for the refrigerator. So they didn't pay $23.65. They didn't pay $2,000. They paid $2,000. How much? $565.92. $2,565.92. And I've put a note down here because I want you to recognize that this is why it's against their better judgment. They didn't pay $2,000 for the refrigerator. They paid $2,500 and some change. That's 28% more than they were planning to pay when they purchased that and took it home. Because that's how things happen, and that's what the appliance company and whoever does the financing is counting on. They don't really care how much you pay for the product. They care how much you can end up paying for the financing, right? Because that's a lot of extra money for the financing company. Does that make sense? Okay. There's another type of loan we're going to look at. This one has a little bit more writing involved, so I'll try to not talk too fast. So these are called a revolving loan. Your book, or not your book, but your paper that you have printed out also refers to it as an open-ended credit. If you want to jot yourself down a note, this is credit cards is what we're talking about here. Okay. There may be a couple of other situations that have open-ended credit, but typically we're looking at credit cards. So a revolving loan has no fixed number of payments. No fixed amount of payments, no fixed time frame. I mean, like none of that happens. It continues to be paid off until no further amount is owed. And typically, it never actually ends because then you're allowed to recharge things to the card and then pay them off again, right? I mean, like it revolves. It keeps going, like the revolving doors. Itemized billing is the statement that you get typically at the end of a month. We're going to look at it from a monthly perspective, at least in our problem, for your card. It comes and it tells you how much you owed the month before. It tells you all the purchases that you've made, how much they've been, total balance that you owe on the card, the minimum payment you have to have. And all of these things, interest charges, all of these things can be in flux, right? So you fail to make the payment, they add an extra finance charge. You charge a whole bunch more, the minimum payment goes up. All of these things are flexible. Nothing is fixed. Even interest rates can be flexible. Sometimes they start out at 0%. They'll offer you a 0% card, right? And it's 0% for the first 60 days or the first year or something like that, and then it changes. So even the interest rate can change when you're looking at revolving credit. Okay, a couple more things. Did everybody get those two? Yeah, okay. Finance charges may include interest, okay? They also may include some other things, an annual fee. Some cards have fees associated with them. Some have credit insurance coverage that is charged on them. Some have a time payment differential. Or carrying charges. How long have you carried that debt for? That affects things on your finance charge as well. And most prominently, the way that the card company figures how much finance charge due to interest that you would have is based on what's called an annual daily balance method. This is a weighted mean of the various amounts of credit utilized for different parts of the billing period, with the weighting factor being the number of days that each credit amount applies. So if you buy something on credit at the beginning of the month and it sits on your credit card for a long period of time, you're charged differently than if you buy something big at the end of the payment period and it's only on there for a few days. That's the weighted mean stuff it's talking about. You might not have heard the phrase weighted mean before, but you know what it is. So whether you are familiar enough with it to be able to give me a description right now or not, the most common weighted mean that you guys encounter on a regular basis is within your class grades. So if you get 100 on a homework assignment, it's not as big of a deal as if you get 100 on a test, right? The test is worth more. Okay, so the assignment's weight, how much weight it carries in the class is what determines whether or not it affects your grade greatly or just a little bit. Well, that's what's going on here. It's just that it's the number of days that it's sitting there on your card that determines the finance charge. Lots of days it's on there, you're going to be charged more. Fewer days it's on there, you're going to be charged less. Okay, does that idea make sense? Okay, the calculations for doing this are a little bit messy. Let me actually show you the question that we're going to do in all the pieces, and then we'll show you the process. For the following credit card account, we're going to do some basic assumptions within the directions that are typical. Okay, so we're going to assume that there's a month between billing dates. That's pretty typical, with the appropriate number of days in the month. So, right, some days have 30 days, some months have 30 days, some months have 31. You got to actually use that within the problem. Okay, so keep that in mind. Think about what month we're dealing with. I doubt they're going to give you anything with February because then they'd have to tell you a year, right? Like that'd be crazy. Where they're not going to give you February. It's either going to be 30s or 31s. They're also going to tell us in this particular problem that the monthly interest is 1.3%. To be perfectly honest, your credit card usually doesn't tell you that. It might, but they often will tell you the annual interest. So if I were to take the 1.3% and multiply by 12, that'd be my annual interest rate. Okay? And if they give you the annual interest rate and you divide by 12, you'll find your monthly interest rate. Does that make sense? Okay, so this one's a 1.3% monthly charge for interest. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the average daily balance. That's what it referenced on the page before, slide before. The second thing is we're going to figure out how much we're being financed, what the finance charge is going to be, how much interest we're going to have to pay. And then the last thing we're going to find is the account balance for the next billing. Okay, so what we're doing is basically what their software would be doing when it sends the statement out to you. That's what this problem is going to do. We're going to do the legwork of the processing of the software company. Okay, so we have some pieces of information here at the bottom. The previous balance is $728.36. The May 9th billing date. May 9th is our billing date. So on May 9th, they run the bills. They email them out. They send them out to you by text. They they send you a copy of it in the mail. However it is you usually select for it to be done, and you receive a bill. And the bill dated May 9th says that you owe $728.36. Does that make sense? Okay. After that, there's a few things that happen. You make a payment. You make a payment on May 17th. $200. So that's probably somewhere between a minimum payment and the full amount, right? Minimum payments are usually much lower than that, especially on a charge that's like $700. The minimum payment might be $20. So you've paid more than minimum. That's good. But you didn't pay it all off either. If you paid it all off, you would be done with it and you'd be good to go. But you didn't pay it all off. So there's still money that remains that you owe. On May 30th, you pay for dinner out to eat, $46.11. And then on June 3rd, you pay for theater tickets, $64.50. So you're adding to the balance account as well. So you paid off some, and then you added more to it. And then what happens, even though it's not listed in here, is that what we're seeing is that at the end of all of this, there's another bill that's going to go out, right? And that bill is going to go out when? Can you tell? June 9th. Okay, it's going to go out 1 month later. So it's important for us to use that piece of information, even though it's not written down. The description above is said, right? It's a monthly billing cycle. And also this is May. How many days does May have? 31, yeah. So whatever mnemonic device you want to remember, 30 days have September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31. Then we got the February thing, which we can ignore for the purposes of what we're doing, I think. Okay, so remember that we've got May, we're working with 31 days. Okay, so we're going to set up kind of a table, and I'm fairly certain that this is not a table that my math lab sets up for you, which is why I've left a big old blank spot here, and it's going to be a little bit messy as we work. because you're going to be creating the table from scratch if I've looked at my math lab correctly, and I think that I have. So we're going to start off with, that's not nice. Let's try that a little bit better. We're going to start off with some horizontal lines to just kind of keep our work in order. I will say that when I didn't do that before in my class, it didn't go very well. I think that's enough. We may need one more, actually. I think I do need one more. All right, they're not equally spaced, but that's okay. And what we want to have first in here is a column that talks about what's happening. So you can label it description, date, whatever you want to label it. But the kicker is that my previous balance is part of what's going on. And it tells you that your previous balance, I'm sorry, and I did that in my first class too, it goes right here. The previous balance is the 728.36. So this is going to be, this column is going to be my running balance, how much I owe at any given point. Okay, is everybody good? Okay, I'm going to try doing this a little bit differently than I did in my first class because I think it might make it a little bit clearer. We're just going to work with the running balance column for now, and then we're going to come in and we're going to add a couple more columns later. Okay, so we can use all the details that were given over here to continue on in our cycle. So on May 9th, we have our billing date. Nothing actually happens on May 9th. We just still owe the 728.36. So we could actually, I think I had to put it here. This is my May 9th. My May 9th is my actual previous date. The next date's the one that I want. I think it's May 17th. Is that right?
Yes.
Good. So we're going to make a payment. And how much are we going to pay?
200 it says.
$200. So on May 17th, we're going to pay $200. So we did owe $728.36. We paid $200. What do I do?
528.
Subtract. Yeah, I subtract. I'm paying part of it off, so I'm going to owe less now. So we'll subtract 528.36. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, that was May 17th. And then on May 30th, we go to dinner. And we charge some money. How much was it?
$46.11.
Okay, $46.11. Now, this is not a payment. This is a charge. So what does that mean? We're going to add that in, right? I now owe that additional amount. So I take my 528.36 and I add 46.11. How much do I owe now?
97447.
Yep. So good? Okay, and then on, oh, no, it's not May. The next one was actually June, right?
Mm-hmm.
June 3rd, we have the theater. And we pay $64.50. So what do I do with the $64.50? Yeah, I add that to the $574.47. And what will my balance be then?
$638.97.
Okay, so is everybody good with this column? Okay, and if there were no interest, then it would mean that at the end of this, billing cycle on June 9th, because that's my next date, on June 9th, it would send me a bill, and the bill would say that I owe $638.97. That's what would happen if there's no financing, right? Okay, but it is financed. It's 1.3% per month, so this is not the end all of what's going on. They're going to charge me a little bit more. But it's got to be close to this. I mean, it can't be extremely different, right? So this column is a good way to gauge what my answer should be later on when I'm looking at the total amount that's on the new bill, which is part C. Okay, but we do have to do a couple more things. Remember, it's a weighted average, and the weighted average is based on the number of days. So I need to know how many days there are between these events. I'm just going to title it number of days. And the way that we figure the number of days is we figure out what happened first. This is May 9th. And what happened second, it's May 17th. And we ask ourselves, well, how many days did I owe 7/28/36? 8 days. Because it was 8 days between that billing and the next time I did anything. So for 8 days, I owed 7/28/36. And then I'm going to go from May 17th to May 30th, owing 5/28/36. How many days is that? 13 days that I owe 5/28/36. Is everybody good with where these numbers are coming from at this point? Okay. Now I'm going to go from May 30th to June 3rd, which crosses over the end of the month that had 31 days. So how many days passed between May 30th and June 3rd? Yeah, it's 4 days. So for 4 days, I owe 574.47. And then I'm going to go from June 3rd to June 9th, at which point they generate a new statement. And that's how many days? 6 days. Okay, everybody good on the number of days? My last column is a really nice computational column. What I want to do is I'm going to take my balance times the days. And I'm going to get some funny large numbers, but I'll show you what we're going to do with them. So what we're doing, for real, is that we are multiplying the previous two columns. So I'm going to multiply 7/28/36 times 8. Okay? 7/28/36 times 8. Okay, that's the only one I'm going to write in here. But they're all going to be multiplied, the two columns that are before them. So if you take 7/28/36 times 8, what do you get? Okay, so I'm going to make this one a little tiny. Say it again.
$5,826.88.
Excellent. Okay. We're going to do that with the same thing with the next three columns, or next three rows. So 5/28/36 times 13. So what is 5/28/36 times 13?
$6,868.68.
Lots of sixes and eights. 6,868. Did I get it right? Yeah, I think so. All right, next one. I've got 574.47 times 4. So what is 574.47 times 4?
2,297.87.
Okay, is that all right? Was it 80 cents?
Is it 80?
Okay.
I'm at MF.
Yeah, I think it's 88. Good. All right, and the last one, 638.97 times 6. What's that one?
3,833.82.
Okay. So what this is calculating is for 8 days, I owed 728.36, which means if you added up what I owed on day 1 and what I owed on day 2 and I owed on day 3, and you added them all up, and you did that for all the 31 days of the month, and you added everything together, then you divide by 31, right? Because we have 31 of these days that we've added together, we can find our average balance. So we're going to find the sum of this. We need to add up this column, the last column, the 5,000, the 6,000, the 2,000, the 3,000, and their corresponding pieces. And what will we get? I'll start you out. It's 18,000 something.
$18,827.26.
Does that look okay to everybody? Okay, Great. And like I said, that's adding up the amount we owed every single day, if I were to do that. So my 18,827, what was it, 26, would then be divided by 31 to find the average amount that I owed over the 31 days. And what is that?
$607.33.
607.33. Okay, so on average, at any point in the month, I owed about $607. That's the average I owed. Does that make sense? And that average amount is what's used to determine the finance charge. Now, because they tell me that it is 1.3% per month, when I'm calculating my interest here, I don't have to worry about multiplying by time because the rate is given in terms of the months already, right? I don't have an annual rate and then figure out that I'm only doing it 1/12 of the year. That's not what's happening because they gave me the monthly rate. So it's very simple. I only need to take the 607.33 from the previous line and then multiply by the interest rate for the monthly interest rate. So what is 1.3% as a decimal? Yeah, 0.013. Okay, so if we multiply this together and round to 2 decimals, what's the finance charge for the month of May to June?
$7, and if you round up, 90 cents.
Yeah. I think it's like 895 or something. Does it show up as? Yeah, so we'll have to round it to 790. Keep in mind, I don't know if I've said it yet or not, but I know I said it last class period. If you make an error in the rounding, my math lab might count you wrong. Quizzes and exams, at least I'll catch it and I'll fix it. It's not a problem. So if you wrote down 89 here and it's supposed to be 90, we're not splitting hairs over pennies. That's just silly talk and I'll fix it. But it's up to you to try and figure out that that's what's going on in the homework because you have more attempts than just the one attempt. Okay, last thing then, what's the balance? Well, the 790 in a very real sense is now what they're going to add to the running balance. I got to add 790 more. Right? I owed at the end of the month before finance charges $638.97. So it should be the $638.97 plus the 709 or 790, excuse me. The finance charge. And what would be the amount that I then owed?
$646.87.
80, what was it? 87? 646.87 is what I would have on my next bill. So the next bill would generate, it would send me out a bill that says I owe 646.87 for the month of June to July. Does this make sense? Okay. A couple of things to keep in mind that are just sort of caveats in real life is that a lot of credit cards, if you pay the balance off at the end of the month, there's no finance charges made. So if you've actually paid it off, it doesn't matter what the average daily balance was. It's now zero finance charging moving forward. So that's something that's, inherently different than this problem. They didn't pay it off, so that's what's going on and why we have to pay the finance charge. But that is another thing that can happen. Any questions? All right.